Welcome to the plane of burning sands.
Bum 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 bum. It's Inferno, Inferno. Bum 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 bum.
So Canto 14, we finally get through the end of the Wood of Suicides and arrive on the burning plain. Dante is reminded of Cato as he marched across the Sahara, and here he sees the sinners in their pain. I saw naked souls bewailing their miseries, ranged in many herds, and every group seemed bound to suffer a separate set of penalties. Some of them lay stretched out along the ground, some of them crouched and squatted, and others went unendingly meandering around. Those who wandered were the largest complement. Fewer in number were those ones who lay on the ground, but they were the loudest in lament. Enormous flakes of fire made their way through the air, falling slowly over the whole expanse, like snow in the mountains on a windless day. To hear Dante describe the scene, it's a huge desert with all of these souls around on it. Some of them are running, some of them are lying down, and some of them are sitting. Each of the different postures represents a different kind of punishment for a different kind of sin. Now, all of these are a kind of violence. They're violent against God, against art, and against nature. According to Dante, all three of these are a kind of violence against God. The most direct is just straight up cursing God and blasphemy. But you can also be violent against God's creation or nature by violating what that nature is supposed to do. And you can be violent against art by doing something that's not artistic. Now, how is art related to God? Well, Dante explained it back in Canto 11. Dante is confused as well, and he asked Virgil, "But please go back," I said, "to where you implied that one who practices usury offends God's bounty. I would like that knot untied." "Philosophy, to one who comprehends, makes clear," he said, "and not only in one part, that the course of nature totally depends upon divine intelligence and its art. If you had read your physics carefully, then you will find not many pages from the start that art follows nature, as well as it can do, like a pupil with his master. It may be said that your art is God's grandchild. It is by these two, as you will recollect from having read the beginning of Genesis, that humans were enjoined to make their way and earn their bread. By taking another road, the usurer puts his hope elsewhere, and in doing so despises nature and her follower." So art, according to the text, is God's grandchild, because God made humans, and humans make art. Therefore, it's God's grandchild, and you don't want to mess with God's grandkids. Usury, on the other hand, the sin being committed here, is a way of making money off of money. It's basically being a loan shark. And by making money off of money, you're not producing any kind of artistic or useful skill. Therefore, you are violent against art and violating what you were meant to do. This concept of art comes from some of Plato's writing. He discusses the idea of mimesis, or imitation in art. Art is the imitation of real life, whereas real life is an imitation of an ideal. Plato believes in this world of ideals. He says that all objects in the real world are actually copies of an ideal world. All chairs are made after the ideal concept of a chair. Some are better and some are worse. However, a drawing of a chair is not even reality. It's a copy of a copy. You can't sit in the drawing of a chair, so what good is it? Aristotle argues this point with Plato, saying that mimesis or imitation in art helps us understand ourselves and our problems. Dante here, though, uses art as anything created by humanity. God created humanity, and humanity creates art, all except the usurers, who waste their creative potential making money from money. Again, the three sins here are all violence against God in Dante's book, and all three of these are punished slightly differently because of the intensity of the violence against God. The most direct violence against God are the most painful. They lie flat on the burning sand and they can't move while burning flames fall on their head. Little flame flakes, little flame flakes. The violent against art, or God's grandchildren, have to crouch on the plain while the flame flakes fall on them. And finally, the sodomites, who are the violent against nature, are running across the plain. Now, how does this contrapasso work? Well, the burning plain might represent the barrenness that comes from being violent against art and nature. And what do the flakes of fire mean? Well, there are stories of God sending fire from heaven to consume sinners. And generally those kind of stories focus on blasphemers, people who actually directly curse God, like Capaneus, who we're just going to see. And of course, in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the fire falls from heaven and consumes those two cities. Well, the sinners here are Sodomites. They're following the sin of Sodom. Fortunately for Dante, there's a safe route across the burning plain. There's a little stream that's broken off the river of boiling blood we saw earlier, and it's crossing the burning plain. And the steam that rises from this little stream puts out the flames as they fall. So as long as Dante stays on the raised bank along this little stream as he crosses the desert, he'll be just fine. The first sinner that they see here that Dante asks about is Capaneus. He's from the story of Oedipus. Now, Oedipus is one of the great Greek tragedies. He has lots of family problems, which I'm not going to go into now, but you ought to know about him. And he has two sons in particular who, after he dies, fight over the town of Thebes. They're supposed to share, but one takes control and the other one wants control, and so they go to war against each other. When they go to war against each other, one of the men fighting in the army attacking the city, his name is Capaneus. As he's climbing the city wall, he curses Jove and says, "Curse you, Jove." And he's blasted by a thunderbolt. And so he represents the kind of sinner who directly curses against God. His punishment is the most intense. He has to lie directly on the sand as the flames fall down on top of his head. And Capaneus' pride is still holding him here. He's still defying God, and so his punishment just continues to intensify. So they arrive at the little stream and they start to cross the desert. And as they do so, Virgil begins to explain to Dante the significance of the rivers in the underworld and where they all come from. Virgil talks about the island of Crete and this great statue that's there, which apparently comes from the Bible in the book of Daniel. There's this king called Nebuchadnezzar who has a dream of a giant statue made out of all kinds of different materials, and they represent all kinds of different kingdoms. Ultimately, the statue is shattered by a giant boulder. The dream is interpreted as representing several different kingdoms that defy Christianity, which are ultimately destroyed by the boulder that is Christianity. So it makes a kind of sense that all the rivers that are in hell come from this broken statue and the evil it represents. The rivers in hell that we've seen already are the Acheron, the Styx, and Phlegethon. Acheron represents woe, and we saw that at the very beginning. It's the first river we crossed. The Styx was the river where the wrathful were wrestling. Phlegethon, in mythology, is a river of fire, but in this case, it's the river of burning blood that we've just crossed. Cocytus is the final river we're going to cross in hell. It's at the very bottom, and in fact, it's really a frozen lake. And there's one more river in mythology that Virgil doesn't mention, and Dante has to remind him. The Lethe. And actually, Lethe is not in hell. Although it's in the Greek and Roman underworld, it's not in hell, but it's actually in purgatory. Lethe represents forgetfulness. And the souls, as they finish ascending Mount Purgatory and have been cleansed and purged of all their sins, they drink from Lethe before they ascend into heaven. They're forgetting their past wickedness and going on to bliss. And now we come to another particularly interesting part of the Inferno in Canto 15. In Canto 15, Dante gets personal. He runs into his former teacher, Brunetto Latini, and when Brunetto recognizes him, Brunetto reaches up and touches the hem of his garment. There's a lot of emphasis on posture here. Brunetto moves away from his group in order to come alongside Dante and talk with him as they walk. Dante recognizes him and stretches his hand out to him as he says, "Brunetto, are you here?" It's a sad moment. Dante recognizes his old teacher, who he really values, down here in hell. Dante asks if they can sit together and talk, but Brunetto can't sit because it's part of his punishment that he must constantly be moving. He's one of the Sodomites, one of those who violated nature. And because of that, he has to constantly run across this burning plain, around and around and around in a constant circle. If he ever stops, he'll be defying God more directly and therefore have to lie down on the plain for a long time and not brush off the burning cinders. And so Brunetto has to walk along beside Dante's hymn. Dante is on a raised bank, and so he's up above Brunetto, as though he's been raised above his former teacher. "I did not dare to leave the path to go to his level, but like one in reverence, I walked beside him with my head bowed low." Two things are happening here. First of all, Brunetto, who used to be Dante's teacher, now has to look up to Dante, and he walks beside the hem of his robe, showing that he's below Dante. Also, Dante has to bend down in order to look at Brunetto down there, and so he is bowing to his old teacher. There's a combination of ideas here. Dante bows to his teacher and respects him, but he's risen above him. Now, why? Brunetto begins to speak. "What destiny or chance brings you down here before your dying day? And who points out the road by which you advance?" Notice that he opens with the words destiny and chance. See, Brunetto believed in fate and in reaching out and grasping your fate. He believes that true victory comes from fame and greatness. Dante replies, "In the pleasant life I lost my way before the fullness of my age had come. It was in the valley that I went astray. Yesterday morning I was fleeing from that place when I turned back and he came to me. Now along this path he leads me home. It's an interesting choice of words because we all know that Dante is not going to go home. He's going to be exiled out of Florence. So where is his true home? Ooh, it's in heaven. But Brunetto doesn't understand. He says, "Follow your star and you will certainly come to a glorious harbor, if it is true that in the sweet life I had the power to see. And seeing heaven so kind to you, if I had not died so soon, I surely would have sustained you in the work you seek to do." Brunetto says you ought to follow your star. Go for your destiny.
It is your destiny.
And he says you will come to a glorious harbor. You will come to fame. And oh, I wish I hadn't died so I could help you get there. And then Brunetto becomes our next prophet, and he foretells Dante's fall from Florence. Brunetto has this long prophecy where these people come into Dante's town and stir things up. They're full of envy, avarice, and pride. And they're blind to Dante's greatness. He says, "The honors fortune holds for you will raise a hunger in both factions for your doom." So here's another prophecy about Dante's exile. But here he's saying that hang on to fortune and your luck and your star and go for fame and you'll be okay. And Dante replies by saying, "I wish you didn't have to be banished here. If I could have the things for which I pray, then you would not yet be banished from our humanity this way. Forever fixed in poignant memory is the kind, paternal, loving face I knew when in the world above you instructed me from time to time in what a man must do to become eternal." So Dante remembers with fondness the kindness and the paternal nature of this man who helped him back in life and helped him to understand how to become eternal, that idea of living forever in your fame. But Dante has realized by this point that human fame is not enough. Brunetto is constantly trying to go for fate, go for destiny, find that great moment and become famous. And he tried to instill those values in Dante as well, but Dante has moved beyond that. He realizes that there's something more important than fame and fortune. He recognizes his debt to Brunetto, what he gained from Brunetto, but now he's moved beyond. "I will write what you have told of my fortune's tide with another text, which a lady will understand and make clear to me if I ever reach her side." So he says, thanks for the prophecy, I'm gonna get a second opinion with Beatrice. Divine love. He's shifting from his confidence in Brunetto to his confidence in divine love. And then he says, "But know this much. As long as I can stand upright, with conscience clear, I will undergo unafraid whatever fortune may have planned." So Dante has put his faith not in his ability to grasp fortune and fame, but in his ability to let it go and let fortune take control. Let come what may, let fortune's wheel be turned, Dante is putting his focus on heaven. Brunetto tried so hard to have eternal fame, but he's failed. He's sunken down here into hell. As the two of them are talking, we realize they're not talking on the same level. Just like Dante is raised physically above Brunetto, his morals and his ideals are raised above Brunetto's. Brunetto is only concerned with human fame and the immortality of his works, whereas Dante is looking beyond to immortality in heaven. Brunetto concludes, realizing that the people he's not supposed to be with have circled all the way around and are now behind him, and he needs to move on faster. He can't stay with Dante any longer. He says, "There is more that I would say, but I do not dare speak or stay with you longer, for I see a new smoke rising from the sands out there. People are coming with whom I must not be. But let my treasure, where I still live on, I ask no more, live in your memory." Brunetto's last request is for Dante to remember his work, to remember what Brunetto accomplished in life, that fame. And Dante watches him go with some really telling words. "Then he doubled back, like one of those who run for the green cloth at Verona, and as my eyes followed him, he seemed not to be the one who loses, but the one who wins the prize." Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. Ah! What does this passage mean? It's a little bit strange. As Dante watches Brunetto run, he looks like a winner. He's ahead of everyone else. He's dashing with great speed. And Dante says he looks like one of those guys winning a race. But this is incredibly ironic because Brunetto is not winning a race. Not in any sense of the word. In fact, there's no way he could be failing harder. He's not actually in front of these people, he's an entire lap behind. Remember how he was walking slowly and everyone looped around him? So he's really like the ultimate loser. And worst of all, this isn't a race. There's no finish line. You're gonna run around here forever! So poor Brunetto is losing as much as he could possibly lose. He's not in the lead, he's in an eternal race with no good end. His ideas just looked good. The way he sought fame and fortune sounded really appealing at one time, but even though it looked appealing, it ultimately led to his damnation. Dante realizes this and distances himself from Brunetto. He feels that old affection for Brunetto and a grief that Brunetto has come to this, but yet he has risen above it and he moves on. Before Dante comes to the end of the burning plains, he sees 3 more Florentines. Virgil tells him to stop and pay attention to them for a moment, give them some respect. They're 3 of the great Gulf leaders and Dante's heroes. They ask about Florence and Dante's pretty unhappy to tell them that Florence is terrible. But they ask him to tell about them when he returns to the surface. Finally, they come to the end of the plain where the stream goes off of a cliff. There's a huge precipice here, one that they're not able to climb down. This is again representing the divide between the 7th circle and the 8th circle. We saw a divide earlier that Dante and Virgil were able to climb down. It was difficult, but they could do it. But now we're ascending so deep into hell that there's a huge gap between those who are violent and those who are fraudulent. The inseparable divide represents how very deep the fraudulent sinners are. It also shows how their sins have separated themselves from what it means to be human. They are inhuman. We've gone from obeying our impulses to following our bestial natures to being inhuman. So how are they going to get down this cliff? Well, as they look over the edge into the darkness, Virgil asks Dante for his belt. Dante describes his belt as a cord wrapped around himself that he had hoped to tie up the leopard earlier with. Do you remember how I said each of the animals represented a different section of hell? The leopard represents the fraudulent, with his spots that make him disguised. And Dante's belt, with which he hoped to bind fraudulence, is used to summon Geryon. Back, leopard! Back! Back! My leader ordered me to work it free. I passed the cord from my hand to his, wound in a coil, and taking it from me, he flung it well beyond the precipice, when he had turned a little to his right, and down it fell into the deep abyss. Dante describes with some suspense and intensity that something is rising up from the darkness. When the truth he wants to tell is the face of a lie, a man should be silent. Though he does no wrong, some shame will still attach to him thereby. But reader, here I cannot hold my tongue. By the notes of this very comedy I swear, so that the favor that it finds be long, that even those of stoutest heart would stare in amazement at the sight that greeted me, floating up through the dark and heavy air, the way that one who has worked the anchor free from a rock or another obstacle will go back to the surface, rising through the sea with arms stretched high and feet drawn in below. So he doesn't describe the figure coming up, he just says, "There's a rising figure coming up from the darkness and it's horrifying and you'll never believe me." He says that you shouldn't even seem like you're lying, even if you're telling the truth. Don't describe something so strange and weird that it sounds like a lie. What he's talking about here is fraudulent, something that looks one way but is another. And here rises the image of fraudulence, who we'll have to wait until next time to see. Tune in next time to meet Geryon.
Bum 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 bum. It's Inferno, Inferno. Bum 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 bum.
He instructed him and helped him. Caused Dante to be...
I can't talk 'cause I'm so tired.